This is the last session of this short course. Uh, Let me remind you or summarize what we studied so far. We have started with a brief introduction of cybersecurity, and then I did a brief introduction to cryptographic algorithms and discuss how we could apply those cryptographic algorithms to the different cybersecurity protocols. And then we spend quite a lot of time discussing on internet protocols, especially the TLS protocol. And we studied the weakness of this TLS protocol. And we also study the web application security and discuss what kind of vulnerabilities exist on the web application and how do you overcome those weaknesses and the vulnerabilities. After that, we discuss the other very important concern on cybersecurity, that is user privacy. And I explained how existing cyber applications, especially mobile-based applications, violate our privacies. And then I discussed tools and the problems with social networks, which basically we discuss the issues of those tools, and we discuss how those tools violate our privacy requirements, religion, or what we call it as OSINT. People expose their private information to the cyberspace without concerning about their privacy. There are quite a lot of tools available over the private network, which basically people use to collect those information. So I saw Harvester and other applications available on the cyberspace where people used to gather the intelligent information about the general citizens. So the people will be able to gather those because general citizens are not concerning on their privacy. So we discussed that. Then after that, one of the major application which use over the cyberspace is email. So after the web, email is the major application. So actually the first application over the internet is email. And then we discuss the concerns, security concerns of the email. And I saw how we could improve the security. So I mentioned that regular emails are the postcards written in pencil. So anyone can alter it, anyone can write anyone else, anyone can see the email content. So I also mentioned especially the online email service providers, they are reading our content. Not only that, government intelligence agencies and any other interesting parties can read the content of the email. Not only reading, some companies are selling those our email content and then our email addresses to the other parties. So in order to protect ourselves, I explain how can we improve the security or add the security for the email messages. Then when we consider the email, as you may understood and experience, phishing is very kind of very uh, available problems, hard problems to solve. So every day we are getting hundreds of phishing mails. So we should understand to avoid those phishings. And we discuss in general, not only phishing, in general, uh, spam mails, about spam mails, why those spams occurs, and how to stop those spams, and things like that. Then, so today in these last sessions, what I would like to discuss is the remaining security protocols which we are using over the cyberspace, especially network security protocols. As you may know, cybersecurity is very huge area, it is really hard to cover everything in just 8 hours. So what I try to do in this particular course is a summary of important things. In the last lecture, what I would like to touch the remaining security protocols where you should understand how those protocols work, especially the network protocols. And then the last part of this session today, I will discuss about firewalls and intruder detection and prevention systems. And I will mention after the discussion, I will highlight you the firewall is a small part of cybersecurity, even though some people think firewall is the major part of cybersecurity. So firewall is not the major part, it's a very small part. So firewall may not be able to solve all the problems. So I discussed a lot of problems in the previous sessions. So most of those problems I didn't mention about firewall because firewall cannot solve those problems. So, however, in the lesson today, I will touch the firewall as well to complete that. So then you may cover a complete session on the basic course of cybersecurity. After that, we're going to organize 2 other courses in the coming month. One is kind of ethical hacking one. The other one is cryptography algorithms in detail. Right. So let me start the lecture today. So in the lecture today, as you may see, the first part I'll discuss about the rest of the security protocols. We have discussed a lot of security protocols, but still there are few protocols we need to discuss. So let's consider the major security protocols which right now we work on in the cyberspace. One of the major protocols is TLS. Without doubt, that is the heavily used protocol over the internet, TLS protocol. I discuss in detail how this protocol works, weakness of these protocols, and I discuss the man-in-the-middle attack which is possible on this protocol, and several other problems with that. And I discuss how to make sure we have proper TLS connections, and how do we create public key certificates to establish TLS servers, and so and so. So we have spent quite a lot of time on TLS and its applications and its weaknesses, because TLS is the major security protocol which we use over the cyberspace. Also, I have to emphasize this TLS and protocols which is mentioned on this slide can protect the information when they are moving. That is, information at rest cannot protect. So basically, when the information moves, transfer from one server to other server, these protocols are important. So today in the first, we will discuss a little bit of secure shell protocol, SSH. If you are a system admin, you are heavily use this SSH protocol, and we'll have a short discussion on that first. And then move on to the major security protocol in the IP layer. As I mentioned, TLS protocols works on the application layer. Even though it call it as transport layer security protocol, it not works on the transport layer, it works on the application layer. SSH secure shell protocol also works on the application layer. So only major protocol which works down layers or after this kind of lower level of the IP stack is the IPsec protocol or IP security protocol. So I will discuss the IP security protocol today. And I thought of adding few slides or spend a few minutes on the Wi-Fi security, because when most of us connected to the cyberspace through Wi-Fi using our end devices, maybe a laptop, maybe a mobile phone. So all those end devices or the edge devices, what we call it as edge devices, connect to the cyberspace using Wi-Fi. So then we cannot omit the Wi-Fi connection, the security of Wi-Fi. So I add a few slides on that, or I will have a short discussion on that. And then obviously very short discussion on the DNSSEC as well. Because DNS security protocol, the major one which resolve our domain names to the IP. If there are problems on that, so the rest of the communication may on trouble, because of that we need to have security on DNS system as well. So in the first half of this lecture, I'll spend time on those, and later on I move on to the intruder detection and prevention systems, obviously firewalls. Right. Let's start the discussion on SSH, Secure Shell Protocol. Secure Shell Protocol, as you may know, it works for connecting servers. So before this SSH, there are two protocols which used by the system admins to connect to the remote servers. So they are, Telnet and FTP. So the Telnet and FTP, when you use those two, we are passing our information in clear form to the remote connections. Especially, we pass our username and the password in clear form. Plus, all the information passed through the client commands, and the files pass through the client to the server in the plain text mode. If someone used a packet sniffer like Wireshark, they could record all the sessions, content of the session, including the password. So the solution for that is basically SSH, Secure Shell Protocol, and SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol. Both work somewhat similar. SSH provides secure remote access. So not only that, SSH has several goals while it designs. Mainly, it's designed to provide the confidentiality. That means the channel or the communication between the end device to the server is totally encrypted. However, as you may know, we cannot use public key cryptography directly to encrypt the communication. What we can use public key cryptography to generate session keys. Those session keys used to encrypt the connection. Anyway, the message confidentiality is first goal of this SSH. Then obviously the integrity of the message. That means if there are any unauthorized alterations, we have to be detected. So SSH can detect such unauthorized alteration, intentional or unintentional errors. It can be detected. And it also has a message replay protection. That means if someone records entire session and replay it back, that may not work if we use SSH. And other major feature which we expect from the SSH is the authentication. So when you connect to the remote servers, we should know we are connecting to the correct server. So that means we have to authenticate the server. Similarly, server should know who we are. So that is client authentication. So SSH provides both server authentication based on the public key and client authentication based on username, password, or the public key. So it provides the authentication. So in a summary, SSH, goal of the SSH, or the things which we achieve through the SSH is confidentiality, integrity, and replay protection, and authentication of the servers. Let's see how SSH works in little deeper level. So basically, SSH has few phases in abstract. So in the first phase, the client is your SSH client and the server is your SSH server. In the first phase, basically, your client and the server negotiate cryptographic algorithm, key sizes, and so on. And also, the server sends its public key. Server sends its public key to the client. After that, clients enter into what we call it as server authentication phase. Server is authenticated using the digital signatures. So basically, server sends a kind of a random number, signs using his private key. So since the client has accepted the server public key at the beginning, So using that public key, client can verify the signature. By verifying, the client knows he is connected to the correct server. After that, they will establish what we call it as session key by using this public key, which they exchange. So this session key is used further to encrypt the data. They will encrypt the user authenticated data, then channel kind of shell commands, plus whatever other data which passes in between, they will encrypt it. As I mentioned, one of the major requirement of SSH is the authentication, client authentication plus server authentication. Server authentication handled in SSL using, as I said, public key cryptography. So basically, public key cryptography or the signatures used to authenticate the web servers. At the first connection, servers, any server, sorry, not only the web server, any server. So any server which basically at the first instance sends public key. So this public key is usually not in the X509 format. As you know, in the web security which we discussed, especially these web servers, they should have public key certificates digitally signed by the certification authorities. So those certificates in the X509 format. But in the SSH are not, SSH public keys are not in that format. SSH servers, when we are installing SSH servers, we have to create public private key for this SSH server. They are not in X509 format, they are in distro format. So then at the first connection, SSH server sends its public key to the client. So if that public key is already known to the client and it accepted as trusted public key, client will go for the connection straightforward. If that public key is new to the client, client will pop up a message to the user and ask whether the user going to trust it. Like, are you sure you want to continue the connection, connecting to the particular server? So then client has to say yes or no. If client say yes, before saying yes or no, actually the admin or the person who connected to the remote server has to verify whether he is getting the correct public key from that particular server. So if he is or she is quite sure that is the correct public key, so he can accept that. After he accepts that public key, it saves in a file called non-public key, file non-host file in the SSH configurations. So the public keys in that file take as trusted public keys. So in this SSH are not using any CS, not using any S509 certificates. They just get the public keys of remote parties and pass the judgment to the end user. So end user should accept or reject that public key. After they accept public key, those public keys considered as trusted public key. Using those public keys, basically, SSH authenticate the servers. When you move on to the authentication of the client, most of the SSH clients authenticate using username and password. That means when you want to connect you through the SSH to the servers, so first of all, you have to accept the public key of the server. After that, server asks the username and the password. So you have to type your username and the password. Those username and the passwords encrypt and send to the server side. Server then verify that whether it is correct or not. If it is correct, server gives you the access. So that means SSH use by default typical username password authentication. However, if you are more security if you need more security, so you have to kind of use public key-based authentication. That means as a client, you should also use public keys. So if you want to have client authentication using the public-private keys, there you have to create public-private key for yourself to the client, and then you need to put your public key into the web server as non-public key. So then you can connect to this particular server. So you keep the private key in your side, and then you digitally sign the message, and using those digital signature, you authenticate to the server. So when that message, login message, digitally signed, gets to the server verifies that using the public key you already submitted to this server, and if that signature get verified, so server gives you the access. In that case, you don't need to use username and the password, or you don't need to remember the username and the password. So we can do public key-based client authentication. So if you need proper security, so we need to have public key-based client authentication as well as user authentication. Then SSH go for key exchange. There they could use Diffie-Hellman or the RSA-based key exchange, and then they will establish the key. That key will be used to encrypt the communication between this client and the SSH server. So that's how SSH works. Right, now we go to the major protocol works in down of the IP layer. So that is IP security protocol. So IP security protocol is heavily used, especially when you are establishing the VPNs, what we call it as virtual private networks. VPNs are the networks which we establish by using the public network. Private network, when you are establishing a private network on top of the public network, we call it as VPN, virtual private networks. VPN used for several purposes, as you may know, connected to the remote offices, connecting remote branches of the offices, different office areas. Like that, we are heavily use VPNs. IPsec is the protocols behind VPN. In addition to the IPsec, there are so many proprietary vendor-biased VPN protocols available. However, I advise not to type or not to use vendor-specific protocols, even though some of these protocols are faster. So I advise not to use that. So you have to use standard IPsec protocols when you establish in the VPN. So IPsec is actually the technical protocol behind VPN. So we already studied the TLS protocol, transport layers protocol. So as I remind you, TLS is the application layer protocol. We are using, when you use TLS has to implement in the application. So then each and every application which use TLS need to implement it. So for example, if TLS used for mail, so that need to be implemented in the mail application. If we use TLS for web, the web browser and the server should implement TLS like that. But when you use IPsec, it works in the IP layer, so application don't need to worry about it. The encryption, decryption, and all the security applies for the IPsec protocols. It's in the application layer. It is in the application layer. So it's transparent to the application. So it is in the IP layer. IPsec security applies in the IP layer. Because of that, it's transparent to the application layer. So benefits for IPsec protocol, as I said, is transparent to the application layer. So any application works on top of the IPsec protocol. It has the security because in the IP level, the system do provide the security. So IPsec can assure integrity of the communication, authenticity of the communication, and confidentiality of the communication. It also provides replay attacks protection. So when you're configuring IP security protocol, we can theoretically see three modes of configurations. We call them as host-to-host IP security configuration, host-to-security gateway configuration, security gateway to security gateway configuration. So host-to-host configuration, even though it has some advantage, we are rarely using them. Host-to-security gateway is widely used for connecting roaming users to your enterprise networks. Security gateway, the security gateway usually refers as VPNs in industry. So how the host-to-host configuration works, in very simple way, we are configuring the protocol. Let's say in this example slides, there are host A and host B. So we can configure those host A and host B in such a way if they talk to each other to protect the IP packets or to implement IPsec. So when this host state talk to any other host, then it is in the plane. So if the host state talk to only the host B, then it get encrypted or the protected. So that is how host-to-host configuration works. So you might ask, are there any application of it? Why do we need to encrypt or protect the data only from a particular host to the other host? Don't we know to protect entire communication with all other hosts? Or what is the advantage of having such host-to-host IPsec configurations? So even though industry and the people are rarely using it, there is a very good application of host-to-host configuration, which I usually mention. So that application is, so for example, most of the web application, when you implement the web application, so those web applications are, use three-tier architectures. That means there is a front-end web application and kind of this business processing, and kind of in the back end, there are database. So basically, the web server talk to the database server, which runs somewhere else to retrieve the data. So while the web servers talk to the database server, usually it passes queries, or what we call database queries, through the network. So actually, these queries go through the internal networks. Because of that, we are not considering the security of those queries. So if that queries or whatever the requests come from the browser, from external entity to your local network through the TLS, as you know. So that is protected. After that, queries comes to your web server through the TLS web server processing. In order to process that, web server need to access the database server, which is in the internal network. So web server then passes the database query to the internal database server in the internal network. So since that query goes through the internal network, so we are not considering too much about the security of it. So that is wrong. So for example, let's say host A is the web server, host B is your database server in the web application. So when the database query goes from web server host A to the database server host B, usually it gets off plane. So what is the problem with that? So as you may know, people understand that, or people found that by research, over the 70% of crimes, over the 70% of network attacks usually originate from the inside networks, not from the outside. So that means if some person or the employer works in your company or your organization is committed to crime, not the person outside. So if someone who access, or the bad guy who access to this host-to-host communication, so if it is goes plain, so he can record entire communication. Maybe host B may have confidential data such as credit card numbers, username, passwords, and some other confidential data stored on the host B. So the web server may query it. So if that query is plain, someone will take it as a middle. So how do you stop that? The simple answer is IPsec. Obviously, there are some solutions provided by web database vendors. So some database vendors they use TLS, but the simple answer is IPsec. So we can have IPsec protocol configured from host A to host B. Then this database queries goes from host A to host B, that will automatically encrypt and go. Then the internal attacker who looking for this network locally may not see that queries. It is protected. So that is the good application for host-to-host IP security configuration. As I mentioned, so most popular IP security configurations are common architectures or IP security architectures, or the configurations are host to security gateway and security gateway to security gateway configurations. So security gateways are gateways, virtual private network gateways, or the VPN gateways. So the host is the roaming users. So in this configuration, what we call it as host to security gateway configuration, host is connected to the security gateway through the encrypted tunnel. That means your data in the IP level encrypt the data or protect the data and put it into the public network, and it travels through the VPN gateway in your organization and get encrypted there. And then the data will then, after decrypt it, it passes to the local network. So entire traffic in this scenario, in this architecture, entire network traffic from this host to the gateway is encrypted using IPsec. But after the gateway, that data is in the plaintext mode. So that means if someone here can see that data, but someone here cannot see. Other common architecture of IPsec protocol is security gateway to the security gateway configuration. That is VPN to the VPN. So that is mainly used to connect, the remote branches of the organizations. So one branch in one city of a country might run a VPN gateway, that is IP security protocol configured there, and then the other branch maybe in the other part of the city, in the other area, or the other area. So then, so this security gateway or the VPN gateway will talk to this VPN gateway in the encrypted form by using IPsec. So if the data traffic starts here from this particular computer, that is comes plain text as usual to this IPsec or the VPN gateway. So then it gets protected here. And this protected data packet will pass to the internet. So that travels through that to the destination. So when that packet reaches the destination gateway knows how to decrypt that. So when the packet gets decrypted and decrypted data will put back into the network, and it will eventually reach to the end system. So that is what we call VPN, network to network configuration of or the architecture of IPsec protocol. So when you use kind of, let me, right. Excuse me. Then when you use this IPsec configuration, we can mainly see two modes of operation. One mode is called the transport mode, other mode is called as tunneling mode. Transport mode does not encrypt the entire IP packet. It only encrypts the IP data. Because of that, original IP address is visible to the intruders. However, since it's not encrypting the IP header, that is faster compared to the other mode. So the other mode is tunneling mode. Tunneling mode encrypts the entire packet, protect the entire packet, including the IP address, original IP address. So if IP address is encrypted or protected, as you may know, that packet cannot traverse because destination IP is not visible to the intermediate switches or the routers. So then that packet cannot travel to the destination. Because of that, if you encrypt the IP header, we need to add the new IP header. So that creates a new IP header, and we have to add it and remove that, so then it gets slow. Then you might ask, so which IP address we use in this new IP header as the destination? So usually in the tunnel mode, used in this particular configuration. So in this configuration, let's say this particular host wants to talk to this host in the tunneling mode. So then what happened? He created, in this machine, will generate the IP packet, which has the source IP address here, destination IP address there. So then it starts traversing through the network. It eventually reaches to this IPsec gateway or the VPN gateway. So configured into the tunneling mode from this VPN gateway to that VPN gateway. Then what happened in this particular source VPN gateway? So that gateway will encrypt entire packet, protect entire packet, including this destination address or the header. So after that, he put the new IP header to this packet. So this new IP header sources this VPN gateway, destination IP is this VPN gateway. So then it creates a new IP header. So using that new IP header, packet knows how to travel from this gateway to that gateway. So when that packet reaches this gateway removes the encryption. So because this gateway has access to these IPsec security keys, so they remove the encryption and get access to the original IP packet. So this original IP packet put back to his network, then this original IP packet has the destination IP, so then this packet knows how to reach this correct destination. So that is usually tunneling mode. So in the VPN gateways, basically use IPsec in tunneling mode. In the transport mode, we are not encrypting the IP packet, we only encrypt in the data. So in order to provide the security for the IP layer, so we use two different IP headers. You know, in the TCP IP protocol stack, we have, when the packets moves from top layer to the bottom, each layer will add the specific headers. So usually IP layer add the IP header. So in case we configure the IP security in the IP layer, IPsec protocol may add two headers. So what we call it as authentication header and encapsulation security payload. Authentication headers provide the authentication and integrity features to the payload. That means the data. It provides the integrity and authenticity of the data. So if we add the encapsulation security payload or the ESP headers, it provides the encryption or the confidentiality of the payload, that is encryption of the data packet. So let's have a look how this authentication header look like in both modes. What are the both modes? The transport mode and the tunneling mode. The transport mode basically protect the data. Data to the IP layer is, the data of the application plus the TCP header or the UDP header. So including this top layer header, we consider that as the data to the IP layer. That is, So I guess you know. So then what we do, we create an authentication header which can be used to check the integrity and authentication of this data, especially if it works in the transport mode. So we add authentication header. If you use on the tunnel mode, we create this authentication header including the original IP address, that is this address, including the original IP address. TCP header and the data will be used to calculate this authentication header. So we will add the new IP address after that, new IP header after that, before this packet goes to the media access control layer or the bottom layer of the network architecture. So then the other header which we use on the IPsec is the encapsulation security payload. So encapsulation security payload or the ESP header used to encrypt the data. So basically what they do, they generate a session key, and using that session key, they encrypt the data, including this TCP header. So then those information about the keys and encrypted data length and things like that, we'll put it into the ESP header, encapsulation security payload. When this ESP header reaches to the other destination knows how to decrypt that data. So as you may know, there are now two modes. There are two modes, transport mode and the tunneling mode available. If we add the ESP header to the transport mode, you see applies the security only to the data. So if we want to apply the security to the original IP address as well, so we need to add ESP header. We need to calculate the ESP header or create the ESP header including the original IP address. And in this situation, we need to add the new IP address to the packet. So this is the tunneling mode. So there are kind of 4 dimensions. We have 2 headers, authentication header and encapsulation security payload. We have 2 modes, that is transport mode and the tunneling mode. So based on these 2 different modes, we added 2 different headers to the data or to the data and the header. So for example, this complicated diagram here, if you have carefully look at that diagram, you may understand how that works. So for example, you see this upper layer, we have our upper layer data, our application data. So these 2 applications basically going to talk to each other. So regularly, let's say they are using TCP/IP, so then they pass this data chunk into this data into the protocol units, those that passes to the TCP layer or the UDP layer, whatever. Then in this TCP, UDP, this transport layer, they will create the transport packet, TCP packet or the UDP packet. That will add the TCP or a UDP header to the packet. Then there is application data which might have an application header, application protocol header, and then we insert a new header, TCP or the UDP header, at the TCP layer, transport control protocol layer, the TCP layer. That packet will then kind of chunk to the protocol unit, and then it passes to the IP layer. So if it is typical IP, TCP/IP stack, so this IP packet goes to the data link layer and further to the physical layer and transmit through the network to the other end. So if IP security is used and the IP layer, they will add these 2 headers, that is encapsulation security payload and authentication headers. And it is kind of a IPsec header. So in the IPsec header consists of these 2 headers. So this is basically how IPsec datagram look like. So when the IPsec used in between, in case of transport mode. So then that packet will further passes to the media access control layer. It adds the layer 2 header or the whatever Ethernet header there. So then this packet further passes to the physical layer for the transmission. So that's how it works in the transport mode. So when we move on to the tunnel mode, have a look, what is the difference? Difference is it adds the new IP header. It's adds the new IP header. In the previous mode, you see this is an IP header. So this IP header is the IP header of the original packet. So this IP header created by the IP layer based on the original packet. It's the original IP header, right? It's not a new IP header. It consists of the source and the destination of the packet, typical packet. But in the tunnel mode, so that IP information is hidden here. And we add a new IP header here, which using that new IP header, packet can transfer from that end to this end, the network. So then it added the MAC layer header and to the physical layer to the transmission. So that's how it works, these 2. Right. So as you may understood, there are 2 modes, transport modes and the tunneling modes, and then there are 2 headers, authentication headers and encapsulation security payload. So you should understand, if you use tunnel modes, it not encrypt or not protect entire IP packets. Instead of it only protect the data. So in case we use tunnel modes, it protects the data and the packet as well, both things. So basically the tunnel mode is used for security gateway to security gateway configuration. So when you want to protect the data which travels from one network to the other network, we use the tunnel mode. So this is a summary of these two modes and two different headers. So when you consider in the headers, IP security headers, we have basically three options. Maybe we can only use authentication header. If you only use authentication header, so it provides the integrity and authentication of IP packets. So when we apply authentication header in the transport mode, it provides the authenticity and the integrity only to the data. If you apply authentication header in the tunnel mode, it provides authenticity and integrity to the entire IP packet. So then we have the other header, that means encapsulation security payload, or the ESP header. When you use ESP header in the transport mode, it encrypts only the data. So when you do apply ESP header in the tunnel mode, it encrypts entire IP packet, including the data and the IP header. So as you may understood, so if authentication header provide the authenticity and integrity, encapsulation header provide the confidentiality. But practically, we need to have authenticity, integrity, and confidentiality. So in that situation, we have to use both those headers. So that's why here in this previous diagrams, it shows authentication header and the encapsulation security payload, both are there. So maybe in some configurations, so we may only have authentication headers. Some usage, we may only have authentication header. But in the best usage, we should have authentication headers and encapsulation security payload, or the ESP-H and ESP header both. So if both headers applies into the IP packet in transport mode, so those headers apply on to the data, not to the header, IP header. So if we apply the security, these two headers in the tunnel mode, so entire IP packet will be considered for protection. So as a summary, so IP protocol is a major protocol which we use in the VPNs, particularly as virtual private networks. VPNs are the technology which carries the private information on top of the public network. So basically, IP security can be used to establish such VPN connections. Right. So that's basically about IPsec and the VPNs. Now let's move on to the wireless. Wireless LANs. So most of the time edge devices, or what we call it as edge devices, our laptops, our mobile phones, or any other IoT device, most of the time nowadays connected to the cyberspace using Wi-Fi, not the wired network, Wi-Fi networks. So those Wi-Fi works on top of IEEE 802.11 standard. So 11 standard has so many variations. It's called 11A, B, X, G, N, and so on. So even some of these configurations of some of these variations I couldn't even remember. So obviously no one can remember those. There are so many, like using different letters. So based on this, each letter, there are different speeds and there are different security strengths, so the applications or security implementations. So most of these Wi-Fi standards, developed by the organization called IEEE standards, or IEEE. And there is another organization called Wi-Fi Alliance. In the Wi-Fi Alliance are the kind of organization who take the IEEE standard and make sure it's interoperable in between different vendors. So basically, Wi-Fi Alliance adapts these IEEE standards and announce that to the industry or the Wi-Fi device manufacturers or the Wi-Fi device users to make sure those devices work each other. So in the Wi-Fi, when you consider those Wi-Fi security, so from the history to right now, there are different Wi-Fi protocols proposed. So the first Wi-Fi protocol actually works without any security. That means anyone who runs a packet sniffer, such as a Wireshark, can capture entire Wi-Fi communication. Plus, most of this primitive Wi-Fi protocol, they don't have the authentications as well. Later on, people realized that there are so many packet sniffers, wireless packet sniffers available over the internet. People realized bad guys are using those packet sniffers to collect the Wi-Fi data transmitted over there. So, if you are using LAN networks, if someone want to tamper it, or if someone want to capture the data, they have to somehow connect it to the same LAN, right? So, if in case we are using Wi-Fi, that is not true. So, for example, someone from the parking lot, or someone who in the next house, or someone who were walking on the road, can connect to your organization network. They don't need to physically come to the organization to be access your Wi-Fi network. So people have realized that. So they have introduced a first ever security to this Wi-Fi protocol called WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy. So WEP protocol uses a very weak stream cipher for the encryption, that is RC4. Due to these weaknesses in the RC4, this WEP protocol has broken. So when you search on the internet, there are so many tools available which they claim they can access or take these Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi passwords. So that uses WEP protocol, WEP protocol, or the WEP protocol. So since bad guys kind of has broken this web, so the researchers need to get new solutions. Solution they have implemented is called as WPA protocol, or WPA protocol. In this wired Wi-Fi protected access protocol, or what we call it as WPA protocol. So initial WPA protocol again used the weak symmetric key encryption cipher, that is actually stream cipher called RC4. So RC4 has, I think, I already mentioned that is broken. So it's WPA also kind of broken because of that. So then later on, people have introduced WPA2 protocol, or WPA2 protocol. In this WPA2 protocol is the heavily used security protocol right now. WPA2 protocol uses AES encryption. So as we discussed, in case we use wired equivalent privacy or the WEP protocol, it is kind of can be broken. So it's used sometimes using WEP. They don't use username password. So they use basic. If sometimes they use basic authentication, sometimes they use pre-shared keys. So however, since it is used weak ciphers, that has people can find out those keys. So they are in confidentiality and integrity, as I mentioned, to using RC4 cipher. So that's the main reason that protocol is not strong enough for the today's application. So as I mentioned, WPA2 is the standard Wi-Fi. Alliance announced that as a standard for security. So most of the Wi-Fi devices available nowadays are WPA2 enabled devices. In the WPA2 protocol, they have integrated different authentication mechanism. If someone wants, they can use username and password to authenticate. If someone wants, they can use external authentication servers such as Radius to handle the authentication, or you can implement your own authentication protocols and adapt that to this WPA2 protocol for authentication. That is for external authentication. So that is much better than having weak authentication itself in the protocol. So then integrity and confidentiality of this IPsec of the WPA protocol achieved using AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. Integrity is achieved using AES CBC mode. AES CBC mode. Encryption actually use AES in the counter mode. I said in the block cipher works in different operational modes, what we call as ECB, electronic code book modes, hyperblock chaining modes, and counter modes, and so on. So WPA2 use AES protocol in a mode called counter mode. So using that mode, we can encrypt the packets. And then using CBC MAC, we can create the integrity checking code. So that's how WPA protect their data. Right. So as you understood, so in case we are using Wi-Fi to connect to the cyberspace, we must use WPA2. So unless otherwise, our connection can be broken at our side, even home or in office. So the next security protocol which I want to highlight today is a domain name system, or the DNS protocol, DNS system protocol. So maybe you know already, or all of you know, I guess, the DNS system. Domain name system usually resolve your domain name, or what we call domain address, into the IP address. So usually the domain name systems are hierarchical systems. So when you want to connect to a particular web server, you might type www.xyz.com, then your request go to the DNS server. Then DNS server sends a reply is the IP address of this domain name. So then using that IP address, your application or the web browser create a socket and then retrieve the content. So not only this translation, domain name servers provide some other information like mail server information and anti-spam information and so on. So in the typical DNS system has a very simple typical attack. So for example, your client, whatever the client, web browser or email client, want to resolve the domain name into the IP address, they might ask to resolve it using their own domain name server. So somebody who is listening in the network realize that you are asking to resolve the domain. So then the people on the network, a bad guy listening to your network may send a response instead of this DNS server, saying the domain name of this equivalent to this particular IP address. So whenever your application receives that IP address, they might load the page using that IP address. So then this DNS client may, or the server may not going to kind of detect that. So it may not detect it. So then what's happened? You might get a bogus IP address for the domain you requested, and then the phishing sites or some other bad sites may load it into your browser. So how do you source that? In order to source that, we need to find it out. We are getting the response to our DNS query is from the correct DNS server. So in case we want to authenticate the queries or authenticate any data, so the simple mechanism for that is the signatures, digital signatures. So the DNSSEC use the same. So for example, in the DNSSEC, if you install the DNSSEC system, your DNS server responds with the response, send a response, digitally signed response to you. So then you have opportunity to verify the signature and make sure that DNS query is from the correct DNS server. So some people think a DNS query and DNS response should be kind of confidential information. That is not true, because DNS information is visible for everybody. So in the DNSSEC or the DNS security, we don't need to have confidentiality as a feature. What we need to get is authenticity and integrity, because when the DNS queries goes or the response comes, so we should know that is from the correct server, plus we should know no one at the middle alter it. So that means we only require authenticity and integrity when considering the DNS system. It's not the confidentiality. So how do you implement that? It is using a protocol called DNS security protocol. Most of the domain name service providers in the world now support DNS protocol. Right. So we are moving towards the last part of the session today. That is, we discussed about the intruder detection and the prevention. So that basically starts with the firewall, you know. Firewalls. What is the firewall? So the firewall is appliance usually in the computer networks which connect those end devices into the cyberspace. External network is usually the internet in case of the cyber security. So that is basically the internet. And so your internal network is here. Firewall, what they do, they separate this internal network from the external network. So internal network in the firewall considered as a trusted network. So this side is a trusted network. In this side is untrusted network. Firewall usually break the trust and untrusted network. For that, all the firewalls should have at least two interfaces. So one connected to the untrusted network and other one connected to the trusted network. So then the network data or the traffic passes in between this firewall can filter out. So how do they filter out? They filter out using different policies, or what we call it as firewall rules implemented in these firewall policies. Those firewalls rules, when you consider the firewalls rules, in theoretically there are two approaches. So the first approach is called it as default commit approach. In the second approach is called it as default deny approach. In the default commit address, what we do, we allow entire traffic from go through this appliance, and kind of one by one we kind of we study the traffic, and we put it the rules or the policies in the firewall says, don't let this server to connect, don't let this IP to connect, like that. We let everybody to connect and disable one by one. So that means blacklisting one by one. So that call it as default permit policy. And other basic policy is called it as default deny policy. In the default deny policy, what happens? We deny entire traffic which goes in between this firewall. Like we stop going the traffic in between. So then one by one we allow the traffic. So for example, let's say we are only having a web server here, and people are only using the web or the web applications. So then we only need to allow HTTP traffic to go through this firewall. So then in the default deny policy, what we do is in the default deny policy, wait a minute. In the default deny policy, what we do is we deny entire traffic, we block all traffic and allow that. So in my web application example, we only allow the web traffic after denying entire traffic. So when the default permit policy, then what happens? We entire traffic is allowed. So then we start blocking the traffic. So we realize there is a FTP server running on our server. So then we block the FTP. Then we realize, okay, telnet need to be blocked. Then we block the telnet. So like that, we block one by one unwanted traffic, blacklist that traffic model. So the main disadvantage is, as a system admins, we might forget some application. We may not aware of entire application set which runs on this inside network, which should allow to the outside. So like that. So basically, because of that, different problems exist. We are not recommending to use default permit policy when you configure firewalls. Instead of, we recommend to use default deny policy. In the default deny policy, what happens? We deny entire traffic, then we know we are safe. And then if we want to let the web application work, we allow web traffic. If we want to let the mail application to work, we only allow the mail traffic. By default, all other traffic get. Policy is much safer and easy to implement. So when you think about the firewall, there are different firewall types. People name it as packet filtering firewalls, and then maybe stateful. In the packet filtering firewall, there are two types: stateless packet filtering and stateful packet filtering firewalls. Then there are some firewalls called circuit level gateways. And the major category of firewalls, most of the firewalls are now in works as application level firewalls or the application level proxies. Thus, most of the historical firewalls are kind of packet filtering firewalls. In the packet filtering firewalls, they filter the data based on this packet filtering firewalls restrict to the IP packets. So they restrict not only the IP packet information, but also for individual packets. So for example, if we use packet filtering firewalls, there are two types which we can see. One is stateless packet. We are not keeping any status regarding the connection. Because of that, one packet and the other packet is entirely independent to the firewall. They may not see the connection. So let's say some malware is spreading and one part of this malware is in one packet, and maybe later sometimes other parts comes to the other packet. So then if these two packets take differently, so the system may not understand that is the malware. If we put those two packets together, then they can identify the signature of the malware and they know, okay, this is a malware, we have to stop that, right? So basically, stateless packet filtering firewall are very simple to firewall. Since it uses very simple mechanism to filter out based on the IP header information, so they are speed and they don't need a lot of memory to work. So in case of security level, if we have required a minimum level of security, we can have stateless packet filtering firewall. So then the next type of firewall is what we call it as stateful packet filtering firewall. In the stateful packet filtering firewall, basically we keep the connection states, whether this connection is established, whether this connection is kind of like a hold, whether it's in progress or in use or terminated, like that. So we maintain a table which record the connection status. So the firewall rules consider not only the IP header, but also the connection status to make the decision. So then we could do better filtering compared to the stateless protocol firewall. But most of the firewalls nowadays works in the application layer. So we call them as application level gateways or application level proxies, or we call them as application level firewalls. So why we do firewalling in the application layer is basically in the application layer, we could have, we get access to more information. We can understand it in the application layer. We can understand whether there is a virus in that data set. We can understand whether someone is trying to hacking into our systems and things like that, because we have access to entire information set. If we do take the decision only looking at the individual packets, then we don't have that context available. So most of the modern firewalls work in the application layer. Problem of the application layer firewall is the entire packet need to come through the physical layer to the MAC, to the IP, to the data link, TCP, to the application. And then the decision is taken by application layer. After take the decision, packet should go back from application to the TCP, to the IP, to the MAC, and then to the network. If get it denied, then it may not go back in the same path. So that means, as you may understand, packets comes from the physical layer to the top, and it goes from this back from this physical layer to the down. Then the firewall need a lot of resources to work like that, and firewall need a lot of kind of huge capacity to work on that. So that is the disadvantage. Otherwise, in the processing wise, security wise, application level proxies or the application level gateways are more powerful. So we're comparing these two types of firewalls which we discussed so far. So we have stateless packet filter, stateful packet filter, as application level gateways. So this is a summary. So basically, it's only inspect the packet stateless. This track the state across many packets. Stateful application level tracks across the packets plus application data. And it examine IP and TCP headers, and here examine IP and TCP headers also, because this all both are packet filtering, and this one can examine the application data because the decision is taken at the application layer. And since it only works in the TCP IP layer, it's high speed, and since it has to maintain status, it's a little bit slow than this, it's a medium speed. And basically, when you go into the application layer, it's a low speed. If you want to get high speed, we need to do a lot of resources, obviously, comparing to that. This is slower. And then in the packet filtering, stateless packet filtering firewalls, we have only simple rules. So we can say this destination is allowed, or this source address is allowed. That's it. But in the stateful packet filtering, maybe not so simple. This is simplest. This is maybe a simple rule set. But when you move on to the application layer, then we have quite a lot of application information, and our rule or the filters are much more complex. So if our rules and filters are much more complex, there are much more possibility errors may occur, or some security concerns, or whatever misconfiguration may happen. Then we have no auditing usually in this stateful packet filtering, but in the application level firewalls, we can do auditing and logging and so on. So in the firewall architectures, basically there is other interesting concepts available. So we will take that in a minute. In the simple firewall architecture, what we have is the internet, and we have a firewall, we have an internet. All the communicator. Firewall may filter it based on those theories, default, based on these rule sets available for them. So these rules depend on the firewall types, right? So that's basically how, in the very simple firewall architecture look like. So then, in addition to this simpler firewall architecture, when you use firewalls, we see different other features. So some of the most application layer firewalls now can do content filtering. Now can use to establish VPN connections. That means those firewalls basically supports IPsec. If you use VPN, it do content filtering because it has access to the content, and it do feature what we call it as demilitarized zone. Demilitarized zone is the special subnetworks usually we configure to put our public servers, because usually firewall isolate internal and external networks. If there are some servers available to our organization which we should or expose to the outside people, so those devices need to be put into the demilitarized zone. When you do firewall, if you don't have demilitarized zone, entire devices in the internal network is isolated from external network. However, servers like DNS servers, web servers, email servers should be exposed to the outside. It cannot isolate. So because of that, we have to relax this security a little bit, or this rules a little bit in the firewall. So if you do so, then those might also expose to the outside. So because of that, we are creating special zone, what we call it as demilitarized zone. In the demilitarized zone architecture, usually we create a different subnetwork in the same firewall, or we use two different firewalls to create demilitarized zone. So most of the modern kind of network security architectures, they use two different firewalls. Sometimes we advise to use these two different firewalls from two different firewall vendors as well, so to get more protection. So we have exterior firewall and the interior firewall. So purchase from two different vendors in kind of in our networks. But some people say buying it from two different vendors is not kind of not good. But some people say it's good. But it's different. You can think about how we could add those two firewalls. In this first firewall, basically do initial filtering, and they have initial configurations, and then inside that we have the demilitarized zone. And after that, we have other firewall, that is interior firewall, and other devices in the network connected through these firewalls to the outside. So that traffic basically goes through two firewalls. And if some attacker here, they have to come through two firewalls to attack our personal devices. So that is kind of other architecture which we can use that. However, in any firewall configuration, firewall can filter out if that traffic go through it. So if some traffic bypass it, so they cannot monitor it, or they cannot filter it. So that's you have to remember. So in addition to the types of firewalls which we discussed, there are some personal firewalls available. So those personal firewalls we can run on our personal machines or the personal devices to stop kind of attacks which even bypasses this organization firewalls. So some of these personal firewalls are available and listed here. So there are operating system level personal firewalls also available now. Modern operating system provide the features of simple firewalling in the OS level. So you can use a personal firewall. It's much better if possible if you can use the personal firewall. If you use such personal firewall, you might notice there are so many unwanted communication starts in your local machine by different applications. Some of the applications which we use, like word processing application, and some of the applications actually talk to the networks in quite a lot. So your network is quite active even though you don't do any work. So that's why sometimes your network bandwidth or network or data may disappear in quite a short period of time even though you don't browse the internet, because there are some applications which basically talk to the internet without informing you to collect some information or to pass some information. If you use a personal firewall, you can monitor that and stop that. And you can use default deny rule and deny entire connections. And then you can find it out which application may not work if you deny it. And then by application, you can allow it, the traffic to go through. And then finally, you can have a optimal set of rules. So most of these personal firewalls are packet filtering, stateful packet filtering firewalls. Right. What are the challenges when you use firewalls? Simple packet filtering firewalls obviously may not see the content of the packets and may not touch that. So because of that, the decision taken on the content-based filtering is not so intelligent. So maybe like even viruses can spread if you have packet filtering firewall, simple packet filtering firewall. So when you move on to the application level gateways, so they are more powerful and they can do more comprehensive filtering. However, in the bad side is they are hard to configure, their policies are complex, and obviously we have to need to keep up-to-date rule sets on those firewalls and so on. Any firewall, packet filtering or application level, if someone bypasses it, so the firewall cannot detect these problems. So you might question, are there any situations where people can bypass firewalls? Actually, bypassing firewall does not mean that so people have hacked into this firewall and bypassing it. No. So some people might use to connect to the network, not through your organization, maybe some other means. For example, let's go back to this diagram. So there is a user here, right? Maybe a laptop connected to the internal network, which goes through these two different firewalls. Obviously, if you go through that setup, you are okay, and you are monitored or you are filtered. So maybe your organization, or maybe due to some policies of your organization, they might kind of block some websites and some interesting content and so on. So as maybe a laptop user, you would like to listen to it, or maybe you would like to access it. So then most of the time, practically what we might do, we might open our personal internet connections. So everybody nowadays, we have mobile phones. So you might open a internet connection there and open maybe your own personal Wi-Fi hotspots and connect this to the internet through that. So if you connect this device to the internet through a different network or different means, like your mobile connection, so then you bypass this firewall. So isn't it? So you are bypassing this firewall and connect to the internet. So through that connection, if you download some malware and that infect here, so these firewalls are blind. They cannot detect it. So after this machine get infected, that malware spread here. So then it may not reach here. So then again, this firewall cannot detect. Even it reach here, that firewall cannot do anything because it is inside the network. So that's what I mean by bypassing the firewall. So then, as you understood, so technical challenges. So parameter firewalls can usually bypass, as I explained. So the rule sets are complicated. If we case use application level firewalls, and obviously we need to provide proper training for the firewall administrators. Usually what happens in the firewall domain, so you might purchase a multi-million firewall and they just deploy in your organization. Usually those boxes come with default rule sets. So after you deploy it, so you may not touch these rule sets because you are not properly know how to configure those rules. So then maybe if you are keen to configure it, you might configure a few rules, then suddenly some application in your organization may not work. So then your boss may kind of blast you, asking why it didn't work, and then you cannot figure it out the problem in your rule, then what you do, you allow entire traffic. Like that, eventually, maybe after 1 month, you are allowing entire traffic because you don't know how to configure your rules. So then the firewall, even there is a firewall, even there is a box called firewall in your organization, but don't do any filtering. So that usually happens into the most of the organization. So that's why we usually tell firewall is definitely not equal security. So the other thing with the firewall is the security research shows that 30%, 70% of the network attacks originate inside the network. 30% attacks originate outside the network. What that means? That means firewall can detect only 30% because only if there is a communication between inside to the outside or outside to the inside, then firewall can detect that. So that is attacks which happens maybe the 30% in this manner. So entire other attacks goes from internal machines to the internal machines. So that is internal networks. So those internal traffic not go through the firewall. So then obviously firewalls are blind. So basically firewalls are, I feel firewalls are kind of a false sense of security in our networking environment. So most of the network admins and the papers put a multi-million firewall, and then they feel we are safe. So that is entirely false sense of security. Right. So now let's have a look on these intruder detection systems, or what we call it as IDS. So usually you heard about some other thing called IPS, intruder prevention system. Obviously, these two goes together, intruder detection and the prevention. First of all, we have to detect, then we can prevent. Without detecting, we cannot prevent. So if usually modern IDS or IPS, we both together, the firewall support IDS features as well nowadays. All together, it works in one box in modern situations. Anyway, let's take part at a time. So we discussed firewalling, now we discuss IDS, or what we call it as intruder detections. Intruder detection systems actually collect some information about from the surroundings and then create alarms, warnings, and things like that to the admins. So that is called it as IDS system. So then in the intruder detection systems, so you might ask where it works and how it works. Basically in the intruder detection systems, we can see there are two types of intruder detection systems in use. So the most popular intruder detection systems are what we call the network-based intruder detection systems, or what we call them as NIDS. NIDS, or the network-based intruder detections, detect the intruders or the malicious activities or the attacks by looking at your network traffic. So they are monitoring your network traffic. We put what we call it as sensors on these networks, and those sensors collect the information from your network traffic, and then based on those information, this NIDS creates warnings and things like that. And then other category of intruder detection systems are called as HIDS, host-based intruder detection systems. Host-based intruder detection systems monitor your system logs, host informations, or the behaviors of end users at the end terminals or the host. HIDS basically keep monitoring that and create warnings based on the activities happens on the end users or kind of end devices. So when you configure, compare these HIDS and NIDS, there are plus and minus points. Basically, HIDS can monitor all user-specific activities. So, for example, logs, process information, and running kind of activities, malwares, if it is spread like that in the host level. So NIDS do the same things, by looking at the traffic. So if the network traffic go through the wire, then they can detect. So that is an important point. So nowadays, most of the network traffics are encrypted. So I mentioned we can use IPsec, we can use TLS like that. So the data traffic is encrypted. So if the data or network traffic is encrypted, then NIDS cannot take good decisions because for the NIDS is clients. Same thing for the firewall as well, I forgot to mention. So if the network traffic is encrypted and encrypted network traffic goes to the firewalls, firewalls cannot have a look. Then it is blind to the firewall. So then firewalls cannot take the decision. So because of that, usually firewalls use a small trick that they call it as deep packet inspection. Deep packet inspection means actually firewall break the encryption at the firewall level. That is unethical. Some organizations usually do that. Some organizations executes unethical man-in-the-middle kind of attacks on top of the organization firewalls and break TLS connection at the firewall level. So then firewall will see the content and they re-enter it back to you. You may not notice it. So then if firewall do that, not only the intruders, firewall even can see your confidential information such as your password, usernames and things like that. So if some firewall claims they could monitor the encrypted traffic as well, there you should understand they do deep packet inspection. So then you should understand not only the intruders, they can monitor you as well. Right. Anyway, back to this NIDS. NIDS cannot do anything if the traffic is encrypted. Obviously, in some NIDS take decisions based on traffic patterns, traffic volumes, and so on, but the content is invisible. But if in case of HIDS, for the HIDS is visible because the encrypted traffic, when they reach to the endpoint, that is get decrypted. So HIDS works at the host level, at the host. So then for them, this information can access, and then they can create warnings based on that. So as you may see, there are plus minus points of HIDS and NIDS. We have to, sometimes we may have to use both. HIDS or NIDS or whatever is in basic IDS systems or intruder detection systems has this typical workflow. They have a knowledge base and they have kind of analysis engine, and then there is response modules and kind of alert databases and so on. So based on this knowledge, based on the events created, they create responses or the kind of alerts and put it into the database or send it to the system admins. And obviously, these response modules may talk to some other machines to take a collective decision sometimes in the modern IDS. Right. Then what is the difference between IDS and IPS? IDS refers to intruder detection system. IPS refers to intruder prevention system. IPS are more active. In IDS are kind of proactive. So for example, in a typical organization, network organization, if it use IDS and firewalls, the simplest network diagram may look like that. There are servers, external networks outside, and then there is a firewall, this internal network, and internal servers are there. Maybe we can connect network-based IDS here. So this will look at the traffic which comes after the firewall. Then if firewalls cannot detect anything, and if still that some malicious activity goes from here in the internal network or comes from outside to the internal networks, then this IDS will detect it and warn to the system admins. So that is IDS. So IDS is passive listeners usually in the networks. And then IPS are active listeners. So this is how this IPS works. So in the IPS, there are external networks, firewalls, then traffics go through this IPS to the internet. So then IPS, after the firewalling, IPS can do kind of prevention. soon as they detect the intruders, they can prevent it. So usually the same role as application level firewall. So that means actually it's similar. Like, so if this is the application level firewall, then IDS can feed back to the firewall. That is actually what we call it as IPS, intruder prevention. So we can run IDS, and then maybe we can feed back that intruder information to the firewall, and firewall can block the traffic. Then it works as the IPS, intruder prevention system. That's why I said all modern firewalls comes with all those features. Typical filtering rules, into the detection features plus into the prevention features. So model of IPS in the typical model is look like that. So we have sensors, that is monitoring points, and then it gather low-level events, and there is an analyzer which analyze it, and then we can report it and store it in the logs. So if we only do that, that is IPS. So if we apply some counter measurements, then it is IPS. So IDS only monitor it, IDS take account the measurements. So IDS with the firewall, that actually IPS. Right. So how do these IDS or intruder detection system analyze these intruders? So basically there are two models, theoretical models they use. The first model, they call it as signature or misuse-based detection. So in this model, they detect the intruders based on the non-signatures, or the kind of, they only can detect the non-threats. And the other method called anomaly or heuristic based detection. In that, what they do, they record the normal behaviors of the network or the normal behaviors of the servers, and then if that deviate from the normal behavior, then they create warnings. So this is based on the known patterns. This is based on the behaviors, anomaly, rules and the behaviors. So both has kind of, both methods are not 100% secure, or both methods are not perfect. So for example, let's take the signature-based system. Most widely used signature-based intruder detection system is a virus scanner or the antivirus scan. It's an intruder detection system. Plus, it is intruder prevention system because it can remove the virus as well. So in the antivirus use a signature-based model. In the signature-based model means they have the known virus patterns that call it as virus signature database. Similarly, some IDS have intruder detection signatures. So those signatures has a patterns of different attacks. So what basically these IDS do, including the virus scanners, they look at this network or the host to find it out those known patterns. If they see those known patterns, they identify this as attack or this as a virus. So usually theoretically, when you consider things we know is very small comparing to the things we unknown violations. So then unknown domain is usually larger. The known domain is small. So you may have heard about kind of attacks, what we call zero-day attacks. Zero-day attacks means attack just reveals. So those are not in the signature database. So these attacks just revealed by somebody else may not in the signature database. So then this your intruder detection cannot detect that, obviously. So let's come to this anomaly-based detection. If the anomaly-based detection, these intruders detects based on the variations of regular patterns. So in order to understand the default behavior, so we have to train the system. When you train the system, always we cannot train it perfectly. Always there are false negative, false positive, and so on like that. So we may not properly train. So practically it cannot. So then, so first of all, if we want to detect anomaly, we have to know normal behavior. So if we identify the normal behavior, then we can find it out the abnormal behaviors. So for example, if let's say in the organization there are known traffic patterns. So if that traffic patterns, if you can for a period of time, if you analyze it, so then we can say this is a normal behavior of the traffic. So then, so if that varies, so then your IDS can warn. But maybe that can vary due to some special events in your organization. So then IDS may create false warnings. So it is not always a perfect. But I want to give a feeling. So IDS use those two theories that not always perfect. So they have their own problems. So if we use kind of signature based or what we call it as misuse based detection, it's ineffective for zero-day type of attacks. It's ineffective against polymorphic attacks. Polymorphic attacks meaning the attack is encrypted or it has many forms. You may only know one form, but the other forms you are unknown. So then it cannot detect. So then anomaly-based detection. In the main problem with anomaly-based detection, you need to train the system. So if you properly train it, you can get good results. If you train it in poor if you have poor train, create a lot of false alarms. So when you kind of evaluate any IDS system, so you use this matrix, as you may know that. So it has in this side we have reality. In the other side we have the detection result. So in the reality, if it is true and true, that means true positive. True positive means there are no attack, then obviously no detection. So there is a good traffic, true positive. So, right? And then what we have true false negative. True negative. False negative. False negative. False negative means detection result is false, but it's true. False negatives. False negatives. Then actually detection results false. They are not detecting it. They are not detecting it. But they are not detecting attacks. So that is called false negative. So if that happens, it's a really problem. It's really a problem. If these false negatives are high, that means you have your IDS is not a good IDS system. And in the other side, let's see this box. In there, it's a reality is kind of false. True is it's actually false here. So detection is false. So that means false positive. False positive means basically it creates false alarms. A lot of false alarms. There are no attacks, but it creates alarms. So that is called false positive. If there are lot of false positives created, then it gets annoying. That means your system admin may get panicked, even without attacks, right? So all these two ends are problematic. So this is more dangerous. Even this one is dangerous. So practically what we want to have 100% true positive and 0% false positive. And 100% true negative, that means, and 0% false negative. But practically we don't get this result. Right. As I said, there are two types of IDS systems in the world. So what we call host-based IDS and the network-based IDS. And I discussed the advantage, disadvantage of these tools, and then I discussed theories which used by those IDS. Now let's have a look. What are these practically IDS available in the world? So in the host-based IDS system, I noticed this IDS, what we call OSSEC, is the most kind of popular open source host-based IDS systems in the world. So there are some commercial host-based IDS system, obviously. So in the if you consider open source domain, OSSEC is a kind of popular open source IDS system if you want to monitor individual hosts. And obviously they have agents. You can install those agents to the individual host. So the agents communicate with the analyzing engine, and they then take a collaborative decision regarding the attacks or the intruders which infected into your different host. Then when you move on to the network-based IDS systems, SNOT are the most popular and oldest NIDS system in the world. SNOT. Even there are some commercial IDS system, and the back end is the SNOT engine. And what they do, they develop front end, because SNOT systems are not so simple to configure. It's very complicated. So then they put some nice interfaces, and I saw sometimes they sell those SNOTs. So in the different names. But in this OSSEC and the SNOT are kind of well-established host-based and HIDS and NIDS systems where you can try it out in your organizations. So let's compare. So those things what we discussed with packet filtering, firewalls, application level proxies, IDAs and IPS to detect. So if this end is very simple and this end is complex. So this end is fast, this end is slow. So this is very primitive, application level primitive. This is preventive, sorry, packet filtering. They are preventive, so they can take action immediately. This is preventive. And this is detective, only detect, not take action. IPS preventive, that take action. This is only examine packet headers, so it's examine application data and things like that. So IDS examine application data and also log files, rule sets, and so on. So this is only works with the packets, and this works with the entire data available to them. So this works with the data packers and things like that. Most of the modern firewalling blocks are complex IPS in general speak. Okay, with that, I can conclude this lecture today, as well as the last lecture in this short course, where we try to discuss cybersecurity in very short period of time. That is kind of 8 lectures in 16 hours. So I guess by following this lecture series, I noticed most of you were following this lecture series. Always over 30, 40, sometimes 60 students are in the sessions. So, but I noticed 120 students registered, but so like 50% participation, we see online participation in every lectures. So that is anyway good. So I would like to thank you for the people who participate all those lectures. I guess most of you have participated real time, and even the other people, I guess they have listened my lectures online later on, because those lectures are recorded and posted onto the site. So they have already, all the people have go through my slides as well as go through my sessions, and by doing that, I believe most of you understand that and would improve your knowledge and the skills. I would like to highlight that I present this lecture series in the angle of defensive angle. That means you should use this knowledge to defend yourself against the bad people. So, however, all the tools, all the knowledge you gain through this course can be used for bad things as well. I believe and trust all of you, and I expect you are not using the knowledge you gain through that particular course for doing the bad things. I kindly request all of you not to do that. So this course I delivered in the good purposes, and it delivered to defend yourself against the bad people. Intention of this course is not to create bad people, to create a set of good people, and create a set of good people who can work for the good people. So with that, I would like to conclude this lecture, and if you have any questions remains, I can answer the questions in rest of the time and close the session. Okay, I saw some few questions I will take as usual. At the end, then there's a question asking proxy server versus VPN server. Both are kind of same. The difference is basically the proxy server just proxy the traffic. That means they pass the traffic in between the private networks and to the public networks. And the VPNs encrypt and decrypt the traffic. The VPN server is somewhat the proxy server, but the VPN server, when the traffic comes from the public network, VPN server basically decrypt and put it to the private network. So when the traffic comes from the private network, VPN server encrypt and put it to the public network. So they do encryption and decryption. VPN is somewhat the proxy server which handles this security. The proxy server is just pass this traffic between public to the private networks. Then there was a question, IDS versus firewalls. Firewall can consider as IDS as well to some extent. Actually, the difference between IDS and the firewalls, and IDS are included detection system. That means the system itself can detect the intruders. Firewalls, not so. In the firewalls, system admin has to tell. System admins need to configure the rules, need to give the rules, whatever the policies to the firewalls. Based on those instructions, firewalls operates. Right? It's more human oriented. The IDS is more automatic. Otherwise, they both do the same role. And then there is a question from Nasim again, sample questions for exam. Okay, that I have to discuss with these organizers. So whether to provide the sample and things like that. Actually, this exam is not so complex. So I will set a set of simple questions entirely from the things which I teach, not from the outside. So you can listen all of my lectures, plus you can look at my slides. I will put all the questions from those resources. So then you don't need to worry about too much about the exam. This is multiple choice question with the single answer. So go through the slides and the lectures, recorded lectures, if you miss any. And then there is a question from Kumar. It asks, as you show on the slide 38, if the users are directly allowed to access the ORG server, don't it create organization server, don't it create a vulnerability? He's referring to slide 38. Let me go through quickly to the slide 38 to see what he's referring to. Slide 38. You are telling if here in the simple architecture, you are telling that, okay, this is the very simple firewall architecture in the slide 38. So this is actually the public organization servers, and then there are PCs. So it's only firewall. So if we use architectures, so those servers need to be the different different subnetwork. So that is a very simple rule which I am not recommended to use in any organization. So obviously that weakness which you mentioned is there. So this is just to illustrate the simplest architecture of firewall, not to use in any practical situations. Right. Then there is a question asked, is there any way to find malicious activity from encrypted traffic? No. Simple answer is no. If we can find, so then this encryption is not meaningful. So if we want to find the malicious code in the encrypted traffic, we need to decrypt. We need to decrypt it. Actually, there are IDS, IPS, firewalls which can do that. So they do different techniques to decrypt the traffic, and then they realize it. Obviously, some firewalls analyze the volume of encrypted traffic, and these encrypted traffic patterns, they detect the intruders to some extent. So, but they can't do signature-based detection. They can do anomaly-based detection based on encrypted traffic. Signature-based detection, they have to see the data to match into the corresponding signature. With the encrypted traffic, we can't do signature-based detection. If someone do it, they have to decrypt. But anomaly-based intruder detection, we can do to some extent by looking at the traffic patterns, volumes, and so on. That's a very good question, Rasi. And then there was a question from Vipul asked, please once again, false positive, false negative. Okay, I will explain that. False positive, false negative, I think it's slide number somewhere down. Don't confuse too much about it. So you see, it's in that detection results. So here, true means we detect it, false means we don't detect it. And this is reality. True means a good traffic, false means a bad traffic. Bad traffic. So take that way. Detection rule, true means detect the attack, false means not detect it, right? And in this angle, true means this is reality, no? This side is reality, that means genuine traffic. Here is a genuine traffic, true means genuine traffic, false means attack traffic. That is bad traffic. So here we say true positive, that is actually good data, detect as good. So this is false negative. This is actually a false negative. This is the detection results. That means actually it's not good data. Here, good data, knowing this line is good data. Detect has kind of attacks. No, sorry. This is actually false negative. That is false alarms. This is did I confuse as well? So I also get confused. Let's explain back. So there are two things now. So here, true positive, false negative, false positive, and true negative. Right? True positive means it's correct. Correctly detect good data. It's a true positive. So when you come to here, false positive. False positive means actually bad alarms. Bad alarms. False positive. That means correct, false, bad alarms. That means there are no attacks, detect as attacks. So that is false positive. That's better we explain in that way. This is, there are no attacks. There are no attacks. It's not detected as attacks. Right? This is okay. So this is basically false positive means no attacks, false volumes, false alarms. That means without attack, there are alarms. So that is false positive. And this one is actually attack, no alarms. So no attacks, no alarms. Attacks, here means attacks, there are attacks, no alarms. So here means no attacks, but there are alarms. No attacks, but there are alarms. Then no attacks. So this one actually true negative. That means this is attacks. So I get confused again. True, even you also get confused. Sorry about it. True positive, no attacks, no alarms. Then false negative means attacks, alarms. Then false, no attacks, attacks, False positive means no attacks. This is good traffic and alarms. Then this one means actually there are true negative. That means actually there are true means good traffic, no attacks, no alarms. No attacks, no alarms, right? Like that. So anyway, I also get confused. You ask this diagram. So perhaps better you read some context. You search on the true positive, true negative, false negative. So you get a much feeling even you ask it. So if I try to explain, obviously I get confused even with this diagram when you ask questions. Sorry about that. You basically carefully have a look. You may understand. There is the what it is. So then he asks, sorry Vipul about that. I get confused when you excuse that. Sorry about it. So you read carefully, then you understand it. So even I try to explain in a hurry, so I get even confused. So then there is a question asking what is the difference between functionality of a demilitarized firewall and the VPN gateway. Demilitarized zone is the feature of the firewall, and VPN gateway basically just encrypt decrypt traffic in between the outside and the inside. They are not dropping the traffic. Firewalls basically filtering the traffic in between these. So the VPNs are not filter out the traffic. They just pass the encryption and decryption and pass the traffic. So then there is a question. Okay, people got it. Attacks and alarms better. So anyway, finally, Vipul got what I explained. Thank you, Vipul. So you understand. So then there is a Nazim asks, PGP of email, explain please. Okay, so I explained in the last lecture about PGP. PGP is the standard which basically used to encrypt emails. And there are a tool called GPG where we can use to encrypt, decrypt data. So you can use this tool, or else so you can use some plugins. So I explained a plugin called Mail-Analog. So in this Mail-Analog plugin, you can even encrypt and decrypt mails. Maybe you are asking to explain the diagram, I guess, in the email. Let's quickly have a look. Maybe that's what you want, I guess. So there was a question, meantime, there was a question why we create demilitarized zone in the firewall. We are creating DMA zone because some of the application we have to expose. Some of the applications like your web server cannot totally cut it out. No? So web servers, some outsiders need to come to the web servers. But some other servers, outsiders cannot come. So then different rules. So obviously you have to put these two servers in then two different subnetworks, or you have to filter out with two different firewalls. So the idea of demilitarized zone is that we are creating a different zone which have less or relaxed firewalling tools. So that is called, it has kind of demilitarized zone. Why we need to relax that? Because we have to expose servers in that area to some extent to the outsiders, like your domain name server, DNS server. Because DNS server need to come, outsiders need to reach that DNS server to resolve the DNS addresses of the organization. Your email server, so outside people has to send emails to that. Plus that server has to write to outside. Like relax firewalling tools need in the demilitarized zone. Right. And then there is a question. Yes, he's asking the diagram, so I guess so. So let me go to the diagram of PGP, which was in the previous lecture. Let me share it quickly. I share my desktop. And so I think you see my diagram now in this slide. I think this slide he's asking how this PGP works. Let me explain quickly. In this side, I say this is operations, this side the message. So this is what we call it as our email message, in our data right of signing of this email and other file, if we attachment file information. Altogether, this is message. So this message we're going to protect. And so first thing is what we're going to do is sign this message. Signing means actually calculate this hash of this message and then encrypt it using the private key. So this process is that. This process is digital signature. You can note it down. This is digital signature. In other words, digital signature is creating a hash of the data and encrypt it using the private key of the sender, private key of the sender. This is the digital signature. So after we create that signature, usually we put the time of creation of the signature and some other details, we put it there. All together, we call it as the signature of this document. So this is the signature of this document, right? So now we have to encrypt the document. Usually I tell, before encrypting the data, we are compressing that to make the same size. So the compression usually do before the encryption, because after encrypt, so we cannot get good compression rates. So you can try it out practically. That is the practical thing. So if you want to get good compression rate, we have to do the compression before the encryption. So this SIP operation, after that we do the SIP operation. That is the compression. Same time, actually before that, what we do, we create a session key to encrypt entire message, right? Session key. So that session key is encrypted using the recipient's public key. So this operation is the encrypted session key. We are encrypting the session key using the public key of the recipient. So this is signing is the private key of the sender, right? This is sender. So this is encryption of the session key. Encrypt the session key with the public key of the recipient. Why we do so? Because we encrypt this entire message using this case here. After that, we encrypt this entire message using the case, this key we generated, case. So then the recipient, when they get it, they have to decrypt this now. In order to decrypt, they have to get the key. So the key is there. So the recipient will decrypt using his private key. They get the key and use that key to decrypt it. And then they unzip it and get the message back. So that's how it works. So this last operation is encoding and decoding, because email is the text-based protocol. After we do this operation, we are ended up with the binary data. We need to convert into the text data. So this is for encoding and decoding. I think that's clear for Nizam, I guess. Okay, I think I have answered all the questions in this session today. And so I guess most of you get some knowledge, good knowledge about cybersecurity. And obviously this is kind of a condensed course, kind of a short course, comprehensive course, which try to cover important things which you should know, even though you are system admin or an end user. So I would like to thank you, all of you, participating in this course. And also I would like to thank you for this Bangladesh Enron for organizing this activity. And it was obviously a good experience for me as well. Very nice to talk because so far kind of I am teaching in Sri Lanka and for the university graduates, undergraduate in local Sri Lankan universities. And then with that, I expand my knowledge or kind of my students to outside of the country. And I saw a lot of people from Bangladesh, Nepal, obviously from Sri Lanka following that. And then I all of them was kind of a new knowledge following this course. And thank you very much for all. And I think time to say goodbye. And you already know my email. So in case you have any questions and you want to do any clarifications and emails, you are very welcome. You can drop me an email.